I stood in my father's study at 2 a.m., holding documents that proved my entire childhood was built on a lie. And my only thought was, how do I make sure nobody loses their home because of what these people decided to hide? My name is Iris Mercia, and this is the story of the night I realized that the people who raised me were never actually my family. It happened 3 years ago in Chicago, in a city where everyone knows the construction industry means something. It builds the skyline, it builds the future, and I had spent 5 years building their piece of it into something that mattered. But I didn't know yet that everything I'd built would become the reason they tried to destroy me. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. It was a Saturday evening in late October, and my parents were throwing their annual cocktail reception at our home in Lincoln Park. My father, Robert Mercier, had just secured a major municipal contract, nothing groundbreaking, but solid enough that he needed champagne and applause to feel the weight of his accomplishments. I was in the kitchen helping my mother, Catherine, arrange charcuterie boards, and she kept running through the guest lists like she was rehearsing a performance. "You'll want to look nice tonight," she said, not looking at me. "People will be asking about your sister, and you know how Jennifer presents herself." My sister Jennifer. 2 years younger, 2 years more polished, 2 years more of their attention. That was how it had always worked in the Mercier household. The math was simple, and I'd stopped questioning it somewhere around age 12. The party started at 8. By 9:30, I was retreating to my usual position, helpful but invisible, refilling wine glasses, laughing at jokes I wasn't meant to understand, standing close enough to be useful, and far enough away to be forgotten. That's when I heard my father's voice from his study down the hall. His study was his sanctuary, oak-paneled, leather-bound, the kind of space where men like my father believed their decisions actually mattered. I heard my name and something in my spine tightened. Not anticipation, warning. I pressed my ear against the study door like I was eavesdropping on my own fate, which, as it turned out, I was. "Iris keeps asking about the business transition," my father was saying. "I've been putting her off, but—" "She's never been part of the plan anyway," my mother interrupted, and her voice had that quality it always had when she was speaking about anything she'd decided wasn't worth the effort of genuine caring. "Jennifer gets the company. Jennifer gets the house. Jennifer gets the investment portfolio. It's all been in the updated will for 2 years. Iris. Well, Iris gets severance. A modest severance, and a quiet severance letter that suggests she was difficult to work with." The sound of champagne glasses clinked together. I stood there in the hallway, my hand still holding a water pitcher I'd been about to refill, and felt something inside me become very, very still. "She's never asked the difficult questions," my father added, and I had to press my teeth together because those words, they weren't cruel. They were worse than cruel. They were dismissive. I had asked difficult questions. I had built a company that was worth nothing 8 years ago into a company worth $16 million. I had done the work no one else wanted to do. I had stayed late. I had taught myself financial analysis at midnight on my kitchen table. And somehow, that still wasn't enough to earn the basic acknowledgement of asking a difficult question. "To Jennifer," my mother said, and there was the clink again. And there was the sound of 2 people toasting the night. They erased their daughter, all while their daughter stood outside the door listening. I backed away from that study in absolute silence. My heart wasn't pounding. That's what terrified me most. I wasn't angry yet. I was just cold. Very, very cold. I thought, everything changes. Not tonight. Right now. In this moment, everything I believed about my place in my own family dies. At midnight, after I'd managed to smile and help serve dinner, and watch my sister accept congratulations for a promotion she hadn't earned, I waited until the house went completely silent. My parents' bedroom door was locked. They always locked it. Another small cruelty that told you what you needed to know about how safe you were in your own home. I went downstairs to my father's study, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 12 as I pulled open the mahogany filing cabinet where he kept everything he actually cared about. Bank statements, investment documents, tax returns, contracts. And I found something that made my hands shake. An adoption certificate bearing my name. Iris Sarah Mercier, adopted the 15th of August 1995, when I was 3 years old. 3 years old. Which meant there was a whole life before this one, another mother, another beginning, another person who had come before Catherine Mercier, decided she wanted a child to complete the image of her perfect family. I photographed every page with a phone that felt like it was moving in slow motion. My whole life, suddenly, was a photograph. Something that had happened and then was documented and filed away like it mattered less than the contract for landscaping supplies I found in the same drawer. But it got worse. Buried deeper in that cabinet, I found financial statements that made my stomach turn. Over the past 18 months, money had been moving in patterns that didn't match the business operations. Money that should have stayed in company accounts was being diverted to accounts registered in the Cayman Islands and Delaware corporations that didn't exist. As someone who had built my entire career on understanding financial systems, I knew exactly what I was looking at. Theft. Sophisticated, calculated theft. And not by some outside actor. By my own family. I dug deeper, and the documents told a story that was almost worse than the lie of adoption. Project invoices were being duplicated and paid twice, once to real vendors, and once to shell companies controlled by my sister and father. Equipment purchases were being inflated by 30%, with the surplus being diverted overseas. And then there were the payroll records. 16 phantom employees. Full salaries, all funneling to accounts that traced directly back to either my father or my sister. This was embezzlement. This was federal-level fraud. And they were planning to file for bankruptcy in 3 days. I know because I found the email thread with the bankruptcy filing date circled in red. And then I found the line that turned my blood into something sharp and dangerous. Iris has started asking about the financial discrepancies. After Friday, she won't be a problem anymore. I've already drafted the termination letter. If she pushes back, we frame it as embezzlement on her part. She's been isolated enough that nobody will believe her over all of us. 3 people, my parents and my sister, had decided to accuse me of the exact crime they were committing. They were going to destroy the company, destroy the employees, destroy me, and do it by making my name synonymous with the very thing they were guilty of. That was the moment I understood that my family had never actually been my family. We were just people sharing a house. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table watching my mother fuss over Jennifer's wedding plans. Jennifer was engaged. Did I mention that? To a guy named Marcus who worked in investment banking and who my parents were extremely proud to have in the family. He was exactly the kind of man they wanted their daughter to marry. Rich. Connected. Someone who validated their choices. I forced down dry toast while my mother kept talking about venue selections, and my father read the Chicago Tribune's business section, like nothing was wrong. Like the world hadn't just collapsed on top of me 12 hours earlier. You look absolutely exhausted, my mother said, studying me the way she might study a stain that wouldn't come out of her white carpet. Have you been taking care of yourself? Maybe you should talk to someone. About the stress. You know how you get. The words hit different now. Because I understood that how I got was never about me being anxious or fragile. It was about me being inconvenient. It was about me asking questions. It was about me building something that was supposed to belong to someone else. I'm fine, I told her, and I was already gone, already somewhere else in my mind, already running calculations, already understanding that I had one window, and it was closing fast. The Mercier Construction Company occupies a 12-story building in the West Loop, the industrial area of Chicago where the real work happens. Not the polished downtown offices where investment bankers make phone calls. The real work, the building, the creating, the actual transformation of vision into structure, happens where my grandfather started this company 63 years ago with a pickup truck and a notebook. I'd spent the last 5 years in that building. I knew every contractor, every project manager, every person in the administrative offices. I knew them because I had treated them like they mattered. Apparently, that was a mistake. At 7 a.m. on Monday, I logged into the financial systems using the access credentials my father had given me when I became the company's CFO. I was the CFO. Nobody had bothered to revoke my access, even though they'd been planning to fire me. That was their first mistake. That, and assuming that being adopted meant I'd be too grateful to do anything to upset the natural order of things. What I found made me sick. Everything I suspected from the documents was worse in the actual system. Equipment contracts with suppliers who I knew personally showed inflated costs. The materials had been delivered years ago. They were still being paid for every month. Money I had watched accumulate in what I thought were company reserves had been redirected. And the 16 phantom employees on the payroll, they'd been there for 2 years. 2 years of full salary and benefits, being paid to people who didn't exist, all of it authorized by codes I could trace directly to my father's administrative access. I called my best friend since college, Maya Chen, who is a corporate attorney specializing in white-collar crime. We met in the private reading room at the Chicago Public Library's main branch. The kind of place where nobody asks questions and nobody remembers your face. I watched her expression shift from concern to barely controlled fury as she read through the documentation I'd spread in front of her like evidence in a crime scene. "This is federal fraud," she said quietly, after what felt like an eternity of silent reading. "Everly." She stopped herself. She'd started to use my real name before catching the mistake. "We'd been careful about that. Your family is looking at serious prison time. We're talking structured conspiracy here. The bankruptcy filing is actually worse because it involves innocent parties, contractors, pension funds, people who have no idea what's actually happening to their money." "How much time do I have?" I asked. 72 hours, maybe less. If they file this bankruptcy Friday morning, the accounts freeze, the money disappears, the employees lose their recourse, and you become a really convenient scapegoat." Maya leaned forward, and I could see the attorney in her shifting to the friend. "But you have something they don't know about. Your power of attorney. It was signed 18 months ago when your father had that back surgery and needed someone to manage immediate business decisions while he was recovering. They never revoked it. It's still active. It's still legal." "Can I use it to move money?" I asked. "Legally, yes. If you're acting in the company's best interests, if you're protecting the company from loss, if you're acting to preserve assets for creditors and stakeholders, absolutely. You'd be within your rights. More than that, you'd be protecting people." I looked at my friend across that table in the middle of one of the greatest cities on earth, and I made a decision that would change everything. That night, I told my parents I was exhausted and going to bed early. I went to bed at 8 o'clock in the guest room, the small bedroom at the end of the hallway upstairs, the one they'd always kept for me, tucked away where I wouldn't be in the way of their real lives. I waited until 1 a.m. Then I drove through the darkness to the Mercier Construction Company building in the West Loop. The night security guard, Walter, was at his post, a man in his late 60s who had worked for the company for 12 years, and who I'd made a point of actually talking to over the years, actually asking about his life. Most of my family wouldn't have known his last name. I knew his whole story. I knew his daughter was in nursing school. I knew his wife had had cancer twice. Walter buzzed me up without a single question. He trusted me. Just like that. For the next 4 hours, I moved money through the financial system with hands that barely shook. $3,200,000 went into a newly created trust, the Mercier Employee Protection Fund. Every transfer was documented. Every dollar was within my legal authority. I accelerated every outstanding payment owed to small contractors. If the company collapsed, they wouldn't go down with it. I secured the pension contributions. I made sure that no matter what happened, 91 families, the families of the people who had built this company alongside me, would not be destroyed by my parents' greed. By 5 a.m., the money was secure. But when I walked out to my car, there was a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper with my name written in handwriting I recognized. Walter had left me a note. "They offered me $30,000 to tell them if you came in tonight. I told them yes to get their money, but I didn't tell them anything. My daughter is going to be a great nurse because of the pension this company built for my family. You're the only Mercier who ever treated us like human beings. Be careful, they know you're moving against them now." Someone else made a phone call. I read that note 4 times. And then I sat in my car and cried not for myself, but for the fact that a security guard had shown me more integrity than my entire bloodline ever would. I didn't cry for long. When I got home at 6 in the morning, the house was already chaos. My father was shouting into his phone about unauthorized transfers and company access being misused. My mother had gone pale and was standing in the kitchen holding her phone like it might bite her. And Jennifer was in the living room with her jaw clenched, typing frantically on her laptop, her engagement ring glinting in the early morning light. "We need to talk," my father said when he saw me, and I have never in my life heard his voice contain so much raw anger. "We absolutely do," I agreed, and for the first time in 27 years, I said it back to him as an equal and not as his daughter asking for permission to exist. I moved $3.2 million into a protective trust. I secured all outstanding contractor payments. I protected 91 pension funds. I did it all legally, using the power of attorney you gave me, and then never bothered to revoke. I did it because I found financial documentation showing that you were planning to bankrupt this company, defraud hundreds of creditors, and frame me for embezzlement that you committed. The color drained from my father's face. I'd never seen him look small before. I also found the payroll records for the phantom employees, which trace directly to Jennifer's personal accounts, and which represent approximately $840,000 in fraudulent payroll over 2 years. I found the duplicate invoicing scheme. I found the offshore accounts. And I have copies of every email thread discussing your plans. Jennifer stood up from the couch, and I could see the moment when she realized she was about to be destroyed by the truth. This is insane. You're insane. You've always been insane, always been the problem, always been. The one who actually gave a damn about this company? I finished. Yes, I was. The doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Marcus, my sister's fiancé, walked through the front door expecting a normal Monday morning. Instead, he walked into a family collapse. My father tried to have him side with them, tried to convince him that I was having some kind of breakdown, tried to make it a he said, she said situation. Then I showed him the payroll records. I showed him the duplicate invoicing. I showed him the emails where my sister discussed using company money to pay for their engagement party. I watched the man's face as he understood that he was about to marry someone who was deeply, fundamentally dishonest. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he set down his briefcase, walked toward my sister, and took off the engagement ring he'd placed on her finger 6 months earlier. I can't do this, he said quietly. I'm sorry, but I can't do this. He left. Jennifer's composure broke then. She screamed at me that I'd ruined everything, that I'd always been jealous, that I'd never belonged in this family. And in her rage and desperation, she said something that made both of my parents go absolutely still. I'm the real daughter here. I deserve everything. She's not even blood. My mother's face went white. Not because it was cruel. Because it finally admitted the truth that we'd all been dancing around since the moment I started asking questions. The adoption wasn't just a fact. It was a weapon. They had used it to justify every small dismissal, every moment of being kept separate, every time they suggested that there was something wrong with me that made me unworthy. That was also when Jennifer's phone rang. I watched her answer it with trembling hands. Her voice dropped to nothing as she listened to whoever was on the other end. The trust accounts are frozen, she whispered, hanging up with shaking fingers. They detected the phantom payroll. Oh God, it's federal. They're saying it's the FBI. I hadn't made that call, but I had a fairly good idea who had. Walter, protecting his family and his friends, the only way he knew how. The investigation that followed moved faster than anyone expected. Federal agents were in the building by noon. My father, understanding that he was looking at decades in prison, decided to cooperate. He exposed not just the fraud, but a much larger web of corruption that went far beyond my family municipal officials. Contractors who'd been paid kickbacks, permits that had been falsified. It was bigger and uglier than any of us had realized. Jennifer was arrested. Marcus had already left. But here's the thing about a moment like that where everything you believe about your life collapses in a single morning. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the actual story. Because I wasn't just an adopted daughter who'd been lied to. I was the only person in that company who still had legal authority, combined with something else, credibility. 2 days later, 5 of my longest-serving colleagues asked me to meet them at a small bar on Milwaukee Avenue. These were the people I had built the company with: Henry, the foreman who'd been there since my grandfather's time; Marcus, different Marcus, the project manager; Susan, the accountant who'd always been meticulous about financial accuracy; David, the office manager who knew every contractor we worked with; and Rosa, the lead estimator who could look at a piece of land and see what could be built there. They laid an envelope on the table in front of me. Yellowed. Old. It had been sealed for over 40 years. Your grandfather gave this to Henry in 1978, Susan explained. He said it was for his granddaughter, only to be opened if the company ever faced bankruptcy or dissolution. He said he trusted character more than blood. Inside the envelope was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, shaking, carefully formed letters from a man who had built something beautiful and wanted to ensure that it would survive. "My dear Iris," the letter began. I didn't know why he'd chosen my name. I didn't yet know my own history, but the letter continued. "If you are reading this, then the company I built is in danger, and this letter has reached you for a reason. The people who raised you may have failed to see your value. Do not let their blindness become your truth. There is a provision in the original company charter that transfers controlling ownership to whoever demonstrates the most devotion to protecting the company and its people, regardless of blood. I have signed every amendment to every version of that charter for 60 years, and I have made sure that this provision remains in place. You have what it takes. Save them." Attached to that letter was a notarized copy of the company charter, with my grandfather's signature on every amendment, every revision, going back to 1961. And there was a secondary provision I'd actually written myself 3 years earlier: emergency stock options for all full-time employees that would vest immediately in the event of financial crisis. Combined, these documents gave me controlling interest in the company. Not because of my last name, not because of blood, because my grandfather had believed in character over genetics. It took me approximately 48 hours to begin the process of restructuring. We secured the contracts. We brought in new vendors who hadn't been tainted by the corruption investigation. We transformed the company from a family operation into something genuinely different, an employee-owned cooperative where every person on every project had actual equity and actual voice in decisions. But before I could move forward, I had to understand where I had come from. I found my Aunt Teresa, 3 states away. She'd been estranged from the family for 20 years, cut off for reasons that were never entirely clear. When I finally reached her by phone, her voice cracked. "I think it's time we talked about your mother," she said. We met 2 days later at a diner, in the middle of a state she'd been forced to flee to escape her family. Teresa looked like my father, which is to say she looked like me, which confirmed everything I already knew. She was family, real family. But she'd been erased just like I had. "Your birth mother's name was Rosalind," Teresa told me, and she took my hand across a plastic table in a diner that smelled like coffee and old fries. "She was a social work student. She and your father had a brief relationship when he was still married to your mother. When Rosalind found out she was pregnant with you, he offered her money to leave, $50,000, and a promise to never contact him again. She refused. She wanted to know her daughter. What happened to her?" I asked, though something in my chest was already starting to understand. "She died in a car accident when you were 3, on the way to pick you up from daycare. Nobody ever investigated it thoroughly. Nobody cared enough. But I've spent 20 years wondering if it was really an accident, Iris. I think they may have been involved. Not directly, but involved enough that when someone asked questions, the questions stopped getting asked, and when the adoption became official, nobody could prove anything anymore." I sat in that diner and let that information settle into me like sediment. My family hadn't just lied to me about my adoption. They may have arranged the death of my mother to make it permanent. Over the following days, as the federal investigation deepened, more truth surfaced. My father, desperate to reduce his sentence, began sharing information about the night of my mother's car accident. It turned out he had hired someone to convince her to stop fighting the custody arrangement. What was supposed to be intimidation had escalated. The driver of the car that hit her was never properly identified, and that case had been closed by a judge who just happened to have a very generous contract with Mercier Construction. 25 years of injustice. And nobody would have known. But I knew now. My sister, facing her own charges, and pregnant with a child who would be born in the middle of a federal investigation, eventually agreed to cooperate. During one of the visits allowed by her bail conditions, I saw her in a holding room at the Cook County building, and she looked at me with eyes that had finally seen what happened to her when she chose to believe the lies our parents told her. "I built my entire identity on being the daughter they claimed I was," she said, and she wept. "The perfect daughter. The real daughter. And it still wasn't enough. They never loved me the way I needed to be loved. They loved what I represented. I didn't abandon her, even though she had been part of the plan to destroy me. Because there was an innocent child coming into the world, a daughter who would eventually know the truth about who her mother was. And I refused to let the sins of one generation determine the fate of the next. With my grandfather's shares, with my aunt's protected stock, and with the employees' newly vested options, we secured controlling ownership of Mercier Construction. Not through revenge. Through unity. Through the understanding that real family isn't made of DNA, it's made of people who show up when there's nothing left to offer but the truth. 91 families kept their jobs. Every pension stayed intact, and we rebuilt. The first year was brutal. Contracts fell through. Old business partners distanced themselves the moment our name hit the news. But something unexpected happened. New clients came. People who had read about what we'd done and wanted to work with a company that had turned catastrophe into transformation. Within 18 months, our revenue exceeded what it had been before the fraud. Within 2 years, we were the most profitable we'd ever been. And something even more unexpected happened. Other construction companies started calling us, asking how we'd structured the employee ownership model, how we'd maintained transparency, how we'd convinced people to take a risk on a company that had been tainted by fraud and corruption. We shared. We showed them. By the time my sister was released after serving a reduced sentence for her cooperation, a dozen other companies across the country had adopted variations of our model. My grandfather's investment in character was paying dividends he never could have anticipated. My father is still serving his sentence. He's been inside for 3 years now, and he's had plenty of time to think about what he lost when he decided that money mattered more than the person he raised as his daughter. My mother passed away from cancer 18 months ago, but not before she finally broke down and told me the full truth about the night Rosalind Bennett died. She named names. She provided information that closed a murder investigation that had been cold for 25 years. My sister works quietly for the company foundation we established in Rosalind's memory, a scholarship fund for the children of construction workers, for people trying to build lives in an industry that often chews people up and throws them away. I got married last spring to the federal prosecutor who helped bring the truth into the light. We got married in the garden behind the Mercier Construction Company building, surrounded by the people who chose to stand with me when my own blood would not. We said our vows under the same sky that my grandfather looked at when he decided that character mattered more than inheritance. I didn't save this company alone. Walter protected it with his integrity. Henry and the other longtime employees protected it by refusing to look away. My aunt protected it by keeping secrets safe until the time was right. The federal investigators protected it by caring enough to dig deeper. But here's what I want you to understand. Every single one of those people made a choice. They chose to do the right thing even when it was easier, even when it was more dangerous, even when it cost them. If you've ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, where you felt yourself disappearing in front of people who were supposed to love you, then you understand what that moment at the dinner table meant. If you've ever wondered whether you were supposed to exist, whether you were taking up space that should belong to someone else, whether you were the wrong kind of daughter or son or person, this story is for you. You are not the problem. The people who made you feel that way are making a choice to see you as less than, to value something else more than your value, to build their life on top of your erasure. That choice belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. The mistake most people make in situations like this is believing they have to choose between loyalty and doing what's right. They think the two are opposite things. But here's what I learned. Loyalty to people who are actively harming others isn't loyalty. It's complicity. Real loyalty is protecting the people who can't protect themselves, even if those people aren't your biological family. Real loyalty is choosing truth over comfort. What she understood that nobody else in that room did was this. Her power didn't come from her blood. Her power came from the fact that she had treated people with dignity. She had built something real. She had been willing to do the hard thing when the easy thing was to stay silent. I want to ask you something. If you were standing where I was standing, with proof of fraud, knowing that your family was planning to destroy innocent people, knowing that you had the legal authority to stop it, would you have done the same thing? Would you have risked everything, your family, your name, your inheritance, your entire past to protect people who weren't obligated to love you? Or would you have walked away to protect yourself? I'm not judging you. I'm asking because I genuinely want to know. Comment 1 if you would have taken action. Comment 2 if you would have protected yourself first. Comment 3 if you don't know what you would have done. Tell me where you're watching from today, and what time it is there. Tell me if you've ever had to make a choice between blood and doing what's right. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between a family that failed you and building family with the people who actually showed up. If this story moved you, If it reminded you that you are more than what people who failed to see you told you about yourself, please share it with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to walk away from the people who never actually chose you and build something real with the ones who did. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who chose integrity over inheritance, who chose truth over comfort, who chose to build something worth believing in even when everything they'd known collapsed. I'll be back next week with stories that matter, stories about the people who remind us what real family looks like. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.